The chamber above Port Lumen was built to impress beings who had already seen the birth and death of suns. Its dome was a single sheet of transparent composite, hundreds of meters tall, revealing the swirl of nebulae and the hushed traffic of ships around the station. Holographic name bands drifted over the tiers of seats, each band inscribed with a system's sigil, glowing in colors to which some species had no words. Beneath that vaulted sky, the delegates of the Spiral Assembly watched children starve. The largest of the suspended displays showed the convoy in real time, a scatter of mismatched hulls limping through the dust of Veneris Reach. The cameras were cheap, the feeds grainy. Still, details came through. Cathari children crowding airless corridors, condensation on bulkheads, makeshift cots welded from cargo crates, a girl with luminous eyes checking the fit of another child's rebreather and then moving on, jaw clenched with the tired precision of someone long past childhood. Some delegates treated the images as background noise. They held quiet side discussions, flicked through briefing slates, or engaged in the polite ritual of not quite looking at suffering that had already been factored into their votes. Ambassador Leila Mourad did look. Her human eyes tracked each flicker of motion on the convoy feeds. She took in the way Cathari ears flattened at sudden sounds, the way older children shifted to block vents when circulation stuttered, instinctively protecting the smallest bodies. She noted the absences, too. Almost no adults. That meant the reports were right. Another display showed a block of legal text, hovering in pale amber over the central rostrum. Mandate 60B. The language was clinical, the font unthreatening. Her translator bead rendered it into the Assembly's trade tongue in Leila's ear, though she had already memorized every clause. Proposed emergency biomedical intervention, population, juvenile Cathari, displaced from Thaleen. Scope, permanent reproductive inhibition to preclude transgenerational insurgency. Measures to be completed within one standard cycle. Humanity's name band hung dim among the tiers. Few eyes were on it. Most gazes turned toward the block of amber text and the figure that had called it up. Praetor Velkun of the Jatiri Dominion stood at the rostrum like a statue carved from obsidian and scar tissue. Jatiri physiology blurred the line between flesh and armor. Bony ridges swept back from his brow, and his skin gleamed like polished stone under the hall's lights. When he spoke, his deep-set eyes never rose toward the convoy feeds. His words moved in measured cadences, drilled and rehearsed. "The data are clear," Velkun intoned. "The Cathari reproductive profile, when subjected to the stressors of occupation and exile, tends toward hyper-competition. In such conditions, you will see accelerated adaptation, increased aggression, and above all, explosive population growth. We do not speak here of infants in isolation. We speak of seed stock that will destabilize an entire arm of the spiral." He lifted a hand. New graphs appeared beside the convoy feed. Population curves, conflict projections, maps washed red by theoretical uprisings that would not happen for generations. "The Dominion has borne the cost of such instability before," Velkun continued. "Our history with Thaleen is long, and it is written in blood. We have learned. We will not allow the mistakes of the past to repeat. Mandate 60B offers a humane solution, clinical intervention, swift, painless, and in full compliance with the Pale Seed Accord. These children will live. They will eat, study, and grow old. They simply will not produce the next generation of insurgents." On the convoy feed, a Cathari boy stumbled in a narrow passage, bracing a hand on the wall. He swayed with the faint, sickly wobble of microgravity. He could not hear the word humane spoken over his body, like a benediction. Leila rose. Her motion sent a ripple through her own delegation. Aides straightening. Side conversations breaking off. When she stepped forward, the Assembly's sound field adjusted, centering her voice. Ambassador Mourad, Helion Commonwealth, recognized. The Assembly's chair being announced. A soft-bodied creature whose own system sigil pulsed weakly nearby. Leila did not look up at the stars beyond the dome. Her gaze flicked once to the convoy feed, locking on the boy who had just steadied himself, then settled on Velkun. "Praetor," she said. I appreciate your Dominion's contribution to risk modeling. Truly. But let us be clear. Mandate 60B is not about education or resettlement or temporary health measures. It is about ending a people's ability to have descendants. It is not contraception. It is not a pause. It is permanent, targeted, and non-consensual. There is a word for that. You all know it, even if it does not appear in your draft. There was a subtle flinch in the chamber. The word she did not speak sat between them anyway. Some delegates shifted uneasily. Others watched her as one might watch a performer in a familiar play.
Velkun's mouth twitched, almost amused. "Ambassador Mourad," he replied, "your own archives record centuries of conflict in which humanity wiped out entire lineages. Why this sudden devotion to biological absolutism?" "Because we spent centuries learning from what we did," Leila said. "Because we buried too many children. Because we know the taste of ash when you decide that some people's grandchildren should never be born." Her tone softened, but she did not look away. "You frame this as population management. You call it humane. Yet you never mention asking the Cathari themselves whether they wish this gift. You never mention choice." "The children are wards of the Assembly," an Ursulan delegate interjected. The Ursulan was serpentine, coils piled neatly in its chair, its eyes hooded. "They lack capacity to consent. The accord was written precisely for such cases, when populations cannot yet comprehend the scale of the danger they embody."
Leila turned slightly. "When populations cannot yet comprehend the scale of the danger you fear they embody," she corrected. "Let us not pretend the risk is certain, or that the only answer is to make sure these children's grandchildren never exist." She looked up at the assembled tiers, catching eyes where she could. The Maliri chorus's cluster of voices shimmered faintly in their shared resonance chamber. A Kyrax cluster waved subtle antenna. Human faces, only a handful, watched her grimly. "We have room," Leila said. "Space, resources, options. We can resettle them, educate them, share the history of their people and ours. If you sterilize them, you do something that cannot be undone. You tell a conquered child that the price of survival is the extinction of their bloodline. You may call that humane. On Earth, we have other names." Her words hung. There was a silence long enough for the station's air systems to become audible, a soft susurration. But the decision had already been made. Most delegations had read the economic briefings, weighed the cost of future insurgency against present discomfort, and marked their votes before they took their seats. They had scanned the convoy feeds, shuddered at the thought of so many frightened young, and then told themselves that this was better than the alternative, that the Cathari children would thank them one day. The chair being cleared its throat equivalent. "The motion is before the Assembly. Unless there is new data to share, we will proceed to a vote." Leila exhaled once, deep and slow. She had not expected to win, but as she glanced again at the convoy feed, watching a Cathari teenager rearrange thin blankets around a little one, she felt, abruptly, viscerally, ill. "Record Helion's vote," she said, "as opposing Mandate 60B in its entirety." Velkun spoke into his own mic bank. "Record the Zatiri Dominion as in favor." One by one, name bands brightened around the tiers as polities submitted their positions. In some delegations, multiple representatives argued briefly before their lead entered the vote. In others, the choice was automatic, blocks aligned, influence traded, old loyalties upheld. Above the rostrum, the tallies appeared in compressed form. Votes for, against, abstaining. The numbers climbed, balanced, then began to skew in one direction. Human aides at Leila's back watched helplessly. Within minutes, the result was clear. Mandate 60B passed by a comfortable margin. The chairbeing's voice amplified throughout the chamber. "The mandate is adopted. An enforcement team will be dispatched at 1,800 local. All relevant parties will receive procedural updates." On the main feed, somewhere in the dark between stars, a Cathari boy reached for a leaking pipe, fingers slipping. His expression was tired. He did not know that beings light years away had just signed away his ability to ever see a child with his own eyes and ears. Leila's hands curled where they rested on the console. Protocol expected her to accept the outcome with practiced grace. She thought instead of home, dry wind over Helion deserts, the hum of old monorails, the noise of human cities alive with people who had no idea their name band had just been dimmed. She tapped a priority icon on the panel, burying her next move inside the ordinary traffic of diplomatic communications. The assembly's systems acknowledged her encryption, recognized Helion authority, and sent a tight beam packet racing outward. It found a Helion fleet on routine patrol near Veneris Reach. Admiral Round and Armitage received it in the still hours before watch change, when most of the ISS Resolute Horizon's crew slept and the ship whispered quietly around them. He was alone in his day cabin, a long, narrow space strapped to the Resolute Horizon's spine. A projection of the local starfield burned along one wall. Imposed over it, Helion's emblem rotated slowly, a sunburst and 3 stylized human silhouettes. Raunan paused his own reports when Leila's priority flag appeared. He sent authorization, and the encrypted brief unfolded before him in clean, efficient script. Mandate 60B. Vote tally. Implementation timeline. And between the lines, in Leila's compressed phrasing, an urgency he had not seen in years. He read twice, once for content, once for implications. Then he sat back, eyes fixed on the slow spin of Helion's symbol, and considered his own past. He remembered the evacs of the Helion internal conflicts, when whole settlements had been corralled into camps and reclassified for security. He had been a junior officer then, with little say beyond how many children could be squeezed into each cargo bay. Back then, he had told himself that at least the kids would live. He had learned later what had been done to some of them in the name of long-term stability. Raunan straightened and keyed his comm into the fleet net. All captains, he said. Secure channel. Flag meeting in 20 minutes. This is not a drill. The sequence of acknowledgments came back. Captain Joran Marin of the Resolute Horizon herself. Smaller frigates and support ships calling in. Raunan could hear the alertness in their responses. They knew his tone. While the link established, he replayed Leila's addendum. An audio clip, unsanctioned, recorded in a side corridor after the vote. Her voice sounded tired, but iron-threaded. They're going to send them medical ships. She said softly. Escorted by assembly destroyers. It will happen fast, and it will be permanent. The accord has a clause, though. You know the one. Alternative response, at the request of a recognized local defense authority, the children have no such authority, so we have to make one. I need you to get there first. The captain's faces filled his wall, sleep-creased, duty-jacketed, most in makeshift uniforms, collars askew. Raunan summarized. No dramatics, no pauses, just the facts. Mandate 60B. Vote passed. Enforcement flotilla launching. The language of the Pale Seed Accord. The clause is narrow, he concluded, but real. If there is a recognized local defense authority that formally requests armed protection, the mandate can be deferred and alternative measures can be negotiated. The children are stateless. The assembly calls them wards. We have to give them a voice. Captain Joran Marin's dark brows knit. You want us to help them form a government? I want us to help them elect something that can sign a request, Raunan said. Council, committee, whatever. Something we can stand behind when the enforcement flotilla shows up and demands access. A logistics vessel captain cleared his throat. We defy a mandate, Admiral. We're not just stepping on Jatiri toes. The Assembly can sanction the Commonwealth, brand our whole fleet as rogue. I know, Raunan said. I've waited. He watched their faces. Some were eager, others taut with apprehension. All of them understood the gravity. The question is not whether this is legal, he said quietly. The question is whether we will help sterilize children because a majority decided it was tidy. The silence that followed was thick. Joran nodded once, decisive. Resolute Horizon is with you, sir. One by one, the other captains confirmed. Very well, Raunan said. We jump as a group. Plot intercept vectors to Veneris Reach. We are going to meet some children, and then we are going to tell the galaxy that they asked us for help. Outside, The fleet's drives wound up. In the dark between stars, the convoy of exhausted ships drifted, unaware that anything had changed. On one of those vessels, a Cathari teenager was trying to hold a world together with his bare hands. Dhaari moved down a corridor that had once been a livestock transport passage. The overhead panels buzzed with intermittent power, throwing hard shadows. The smell was a mix of stale air, disinfectant, and fear. He paused at each berth, checking faces, counting. His mind held lists as tightly as clutching fingers. Who'd eaten, who'd vomited, whose rebreathers needed new filters. His stomach growled. He ignored it. Others were hungrier. "Dhaari," a small voice called. "The washroom. It's not flushing." He closed his eyes briefly. "I will look," he promised, and added waste recycler to the list in his head. He moved on. A girl huddled by a ventilation grill, eyes closed, her sides heaving. He knelt. "You're breathing too fast," he said gently. "Slow it. In, out, like Elder Celery showed you." "I heard the hull creak," she whispered. Her ears flattened. "I thought, it is thermal stress," he lied confidently. "Not a crack. If it were a crack, the pressure alarms would sound." He prayed the sensors still worked. She stared at him, searching. Dhaari held her gaze steadily until her breathing eased. He hated how natural the lies felt now. Behind him, the door to the cargo bay turned wardroom hissed open. Elder Celery's scent reached him first, a faint, herbal musk. She stepped out, wrapped in a coarse thermal cloak, her movements careful. Age had thinned her fur and bent her spine, but her eyes were as bright as any child's. "You should rest," she said. "So should you," he countered, her mouth curled with weary amusement. "The difference between us is that I am old enough to admit I should have died on Thaleen, and that this, borrowed time, is not meant for sleeping." He dropped his gaze, uncomfortable with such bluntness. She had made that joke before, to lighten the air. It never did. "How many?" she asked. "Today, 3 fevers. No new coughs," he said. "The recyclers are failing in sections B and D. One of the hydro bags is leaking. I think the pump will give out within a week. And the young? Tired." He hesitated. Angry. He did not add that he was tired and angry too. They both knew. She looked beyond him to the makeshift wards. "Keep them breathing, Dhaari. Keep them calm. That is all we can ask of you." He had never asked for this role. On Rilanas, before the bombing raids, he had imagined himself, as so many Cathari boys did, perhaps a pilot, perhaps an engineer. Not this. Not the one the little ones look at when the lights stutter. He had become that anyway, because someone had needed to rattle doors and bang on control panels while adults suffocated in sealed compartments to buy them a little more air. "You said the stars listen," he murmured, half to himself. "That nothing is lost out here." Celery's gaze softened. "I said that memory travels, that somewhere someone will see and remember." "Then why hasn't anyone come?" he asked, more sharply than he intended. "We broadcast distress, over and over. We burned fuel to send that call." "They hear you," Celery replied. "They are arguing." Dhaari bared his teeth. "Arguing? You will understand one day, if you live." She reached out, briefly resting her hand on his shoulder. "When adults are afraid of a decision, they call it a debate." He shook her off, angry with her calm. "I don't care about their fears. I care about food, filters, a planet that isn't made of metal." "Then keep them breathing," she repeated, "so that if help comes, there is someone left to receive it." He turned away, jaw tight, and kept walking. Hours later, distant sensors in the convoy's outer hulls registered the faint whisper of space being folded. A human fleet emerged into Veneris Reach, drives glowing, shields dormant, its message buoys lit up. On the Resolute Horizons bridge, Captain Joran Marin stood at Rounan's side as the convoy appeared on their central display. A cluster of mismatched signatures, many with failing power signatures and erratic life support readings. "Gods," someone murmured behind them. Rounan did not rebuke the lapse into religion. Quiet oaths were all that kept some crew anchored. "Tactical," he said. "Scan for hostiles. The only drive plumes are the convoy's own, Hideo Sato reported from the tactical station. No escorts, no patrols, just them. Yoren watched the data resolve. "We're not alone for long," she said. "The enforcement flotilla is right behind us. Then we move faster." Raunon straightened. "Open a channel, nearest ship in the caravan." Communications lit a beam. It took nearly a minute for the lagged handshake. Finally, a view formed. A cramped control module. 3 Cathari pressed close, eyes bright with fear. The one at the forefront was small. His ears were tufted, his fur patchy from malnutrition. His gaze darted between Raunon's image and Joran's, clearly unsure what threat these strange primates represented. "This is Admiral Raunon Armitage of the Helion Commonwealth," Raunon began. "You're broadcasting a distress call. We heard it. We came." There was a murmur off-screen. An older Cathari voice, frayed but firm, said something in their own language. The boy straightened. "I am Dhaari," he said in accented trade tongue. "Our guardians are dead. We look after each other." Raunon's mind translated that into more clinical terms. No adults. Only children. He let no hint of pity reach his face. Pity would crush a boy who was standing this tall. "We picked up your distress signal," Raunon said. "We can offer medical assistance, food, repairs. And what do you want?" Dhaari asked immediately. The question made Joran glance sharply at Raunon. It was an adult's question. Fair. "We want to keep you alive," Raunon answered. "If we wanted something else, we would have stayed away." Elder Sailry stepped into view, leaning on a wall. Her translucent ears flicked. She studied the humans. "You came," she said in a low tone. "The debates above the stars have ended then." "Not as we hoped," Raunon said. "The Assembly has passed a mandate. They plan to send you medical ships. They will tell you this is a health intervention to protect you and others. They will not mention that the procedures cannot be undone." He watched their faces as he said it. The confusion. Then the slow, dawning horror. "Explain," Sailry whispered. He did, as plainly as he could. He watched Dhaari's pupils dilate, his claws sink into the console. "You mean," Dhaari said, voice shaking, "they want to cut away our children before they exist. All of them. Forever." "Yes," Raunon said. "They voted. We were outnumbered." Rage flared behind Dhaari's eyes. Then it drained, leaving something worse. A brittle numbness. In that moment, Raunon saw not just a teenager, but the possibility of a future fighter. Someone forged by a single decisive betrayal. "We are not asking you to trust us," Raunon said. "You have no reason to. But there is a clause in our treaties. If a recognized local defense authority asks us for protection, we are allowed to intervene differently, to block the procedures, to negotiate new terms. We can't fabricate such an authority. It must be you." Sailry understood first. Her ears lifted. "You mean you want us to form a council," she said. "Elect leaders. Give them names, roles." "Yes," Raunon said. "You may call it what you like, but it has to be something the Assembly cannot claim is our puppet." Dhaari looked between them. "What if we say no?" "Then the enforcement flotilla will come," Raunon said quietly. "They will arrive after us. They will carry doctors and armed escorts. They will tell you they are here to help you live safer lives. If you refuse the procedures, they will argue that you are not competent to decide. They will claim the right to decide for you." "And you?" Dhaari pressed. "If we refuse, will you leave?" "No," Raunon said, surprising himself with the certainty. "I won't abandon you, but I will have less ground to stand on when I tell them to stay away. Help me give them a reason to listen, Dhaari. Let us help you choose your own defenders." That word struck home. Choose. Elder Sailrai laid a hand on Dhaari's arm. "Gather the older ones," she said. "We must decide." Dhaari's jaw set. "They will only ask for this once," he said. "We cannot do it over if we change our minds." "That is what they count on," Sailry murmured. Fear of choosing. But if we choose nothing, their ships still come, their tools still cut. We must choose something, or accept that we chose to be silent. Dhaari hesitated only a heartbeat more. Then he turned his head and shouted in Cathari, calling names. Around him, the press of young bodies stirred. In the hours that followed, human boarding shuttles threaded their way to the convoy, bearing medical teams, engineers, and soldiers. Sergeant Merrick Ryback stepped out of the first shuttle into air that smelled of recycled sweat and bitter disinfectant. He was broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair and a face lined by old campaigns. Armor plates bulked under his uniform jacket. Children watched him with huge, mistrustful eyes. Beside him, Zuri Naidu moved with a lighter step. Her gaze swept the corridor once, marking exits, choke points, and lines of fire. Then she focused on the small Cathari ahead. "Sergeant Ryback?" a soft voice said, through a translation unit tuned hastily en route. He looked down. A child no more than 10 human equivalent stood there, ears flat, holding a battered tablet. Their hands shook. "That's me," Merrick said gently. "And you are?" "They call me Hennis," the child said. "Dhaari told me to show you where the worst leaks are." Merrick snorted. "Good. Lead the way." Behind him, Dr. Sanaa Baridze stepped carefully around a rusted strut. She had dark hair pulled back with a practical band, a medical kit slung over one shoulder, and an anthropologist's habit of noticing everything. The way children grouped themselves, the way they flinched at certain sounds, relaxed at others. She saw Dhaari waiting at a junction, expression tight, Elder Sailry beside him. The elder inclined her head to the humans. "Welcome to the Child Star Caravan," she said, using the nickname the children had whispered among themselves, now given shape and traded for official use. "We are sorry we have nothing to offer you but more work. We brought food," Sanaa replied. "So we'll consider ourselves paid." Sailry's mouth quirked. The election took place in a cargo bay that still smelled faintly of old grain. Humans watched from the periphery, careful not to intrude. Merrick and Zuri's Marines lined the walls, weapons lowered, posture deliberately non-threatening. Dhaari had never seen anything like a formal vote. Elections on Cathari worlds had been managed by adults, stories told in schools, abstract processes. But he knew how to assemble a circle. He knew how to let those who wanted to speak, speak. "We have 3 choices," he said, his voice echoing faintly. Around him, dozens of young faces turned up. "We let the assembly do what it wants. We fight without help until we break. Or we choose some of us to speak for all. Those will sign a request to the humans, asking them to protect us from the sterilization. What if they become tyrants?" Someone called, a girl with a torn ear and fire in her eyes. "Adults always do. Then we replace them," Elder Sailry said sharply. "If you choose no one now because you fear betrayal later, then you are just handing your future to those who already decided you are a threat. Choose your cousins, your nestmates, your rivals, your friends. But choose," they argued. Some wanted to refuse all outside help. Certain humans were just another set of overlords. Others wanted to name Dhaari and Sailry and be done. Dhaari himself refused the idea of absolute authority. "I don't want to be your master," he said, voice rough. "I barely kept you breathing, but I will be your messenger if you ask me. I will speak the words you agree on, and I will not sign anything you have not heard." In the end, they formed a council of 9, older teenagers, balanced across the different vessels, with Sailry as elder advisor and Dhaari as spokesperson. They scrawled their names on worn scrap as best they could. Then, on a clean human screen that Raunan's people extended, the Provisional Defense Council of Displaced Cathar from Thelene became a line in Helion's legal code in that moment. Not a story in someone's family, not a rumor, an entity the Assembly would have to acknowledge. The Council's first act, recorded by Sanaa's wrist cam and transmitted up the line, was a formal request in trade tongue. "We, the children of Thelene, displaced and leaderless, ask the Helion Commonwealth for armed protection against forced medical intervention, as outlined in Mandate 60B. Dhaari said, claws clicking once against the console as he gripped it. We ask for time to grow, for the right to decide what happens to our own bodies when we are old enough to understand. Admiral Raunen Armitage listened to the request on the Resolute Horizon's bridge. That will do, he murmured, understanding better than most how fragile that we was. It was enough. He sent the document through Helion's legal corps for formal stamping. The moment it was acknowledged, his fleet's posture changed in the eyes of the law. They were no longer a patrol. They were responding to a call. The enforcement flotilla arrived 2 days later. By then, the Child Star Caravan's ships had been ringed with bastion field projectors. Gleaming pylons dropped and calibrated by Helion engineers under Ritu Kovac's sharp eye. Think of it like a bubble, Ritu had told the Cathari children who came to watch. If someone throws a rock, the bubble ripples and absorbs most of the impact. But bubbles take energy, so we have to keep the power steady. How steady? A teenage boy had asked, ears pricked. Very, Ritu had said, smiling despite exhaustion. So I'm going to need apprentices. Now those apprentices watched from their stations as the enforcement flotilla's drive flares appeared on the long-range screens. A cluster of sleek medical vessels flanked by assembly-branded destroyers and cruisers. Authority declares arrival of Enforcement Group 12 Alpha, came a crisp voice over open channel, broadcast in the Assembly's trade tongue. We come under Mandate 60B to conduct biomedical interventions for population stability. Cathari vessels, prepare to accept boarding parties. Human vessels, stand clear. You have no jurisdiction here. Raunen let the sentence reach its full stop. Then he replied, This is Admiral Raunen Armitage, Helion Commonwealth. Pursuant to Clause 9 of the Pale Seed Accord, we are here under formal request from a recognized local defense authority. You do not have exclusive jurisdiction. A moment of silence. Then, a different voice, more measured, bled through. You refer to the so-called Provisional Defense Council, the speaker said. Children with no legal standing. You cannot seriously suggest. I suggest nothing, Raunen said. I present documents. The Council's existence has been logged and acknowledged by the Assembly's own registry. You can check. There was muted commotion on the enforcement flagship's bridge. Delegates back at Port Lumen scrambled through legal databases, cursing human opportunism and their own inattention to obscure clauses. On the convoy feed, Cathari children hovered at viewports, peering out at distant flashes of drive light. To them, the enforcement flotilla was a formation of predators' eyes. Inside the spiral assembly chamber, events moved just as quickly. Leila watched the fresh feeds with a bitter knot in her stomach. The enforcement ships bore assembly sigils, their hulls painted in the neutral white of humanitarian missions. But their weapons were hot. Around her, the earlier confidence in a tidy operation began to fray as delegates realized Helion had effectively placed its fleet between scalpel and subject. The Commonwealth is abusing a technicality, an Ursulan hissed. They're building a militia out of children. Children with guns are still children, a Chirax chorister replied dryly. Children with scalpels pointed at them are something worse. Envoy Trishul of the Malairi chorus shimmered in their resonance sphere, a chorus of voices overlaid. The chorus had long prided itself on strict pacifism, on never endorsing any kind of militarization. Now, confronted with the raw sight of Cathari kids huddled under human shields, Trishul felt their internal harmonies falter. They could hear their own people's old songs in their shared mind. Laments for seasons when chorus larvae had been culled by occupying forces who saw them as future threats. They knew which side of this memory they wanted to stand on. Chair, Leila said, seizing the moment. I remind the Assembly that the clause Admiral Armitage is invoking was drafted by a Malairi delegation after the culling on Seraphis. It was written for precisely this case. When refugees ask for protection against the Assembly's own overreach, her gaze flicked to Trishul's chamber. Trishul rippled, a visible sign of inner conflict. At last, their combined voice emerged. The chorus confirms, Trishul said. The clause applies. We did not anticipate this exact configuration, but the principle holds. These young have asked for guardians, not overlords. A murmur ran through the chamber. Support. Skepticism. Recalculations. On Harborfall, far below the formal debates, storm clouds churned over a raw, rocky landscape. When the Assembly had grudgingly accepted Helion's compromise proposal that the Cathari children be settled on a monitored world under human oversight, Harborfall had been chosen because no one wanted it. The atmosphere was thin, the winds wild. The only useful asset was an abandoned orbital framework, Zenith Crown, left half-completed by a failed mining consortium. Raunan had looked at the scans and seen something else, a fortress that could be built from scrap. Within months, the Child Star caravan's battered hulls descended through Harborfall's storms. Fabric domes blossomed in ravines. Under Ritu's direction, spirals of habpods rose around geothermal vents. Bastion field projectors were anchored deep into bedrock, their emitters linked in carefully calculated grids. Harborfall's surface settlements were designed as much for psychological stability as for defense. Sanaa insisted on that. Children who had lived in metal tubes needed to see sky, even if it was streaked with tearing clouds. They needed soil under their paws, not just deck plating. Merrick drilled joint squads in a canyon, his human marines interspersed with lanky Cathari figures. He watched closely, ready to step in if the balance tipped too far toward fetishizing weapons. "These are tools," he said, holding up a practice rifle. "Nothing more. A tool you understand can save you. A tool you worship will own you." Dhaari listened. He heard the warning. But each time he took a weapon in his hands, he felt something unwind inside, a thread of helplessness pulling taut, then snapping. He knew that thrill was dangerous. He could not quite let it go. Around him, Harborfall found its rhythm. Children studied languages in prefab classrooms by day, then worked in greenhouses at dusk under Ritu's grow lights. They streamed into joint assemblies where Elder Sailri and human teachers spoke about ethics, history, law. They held rituals to remember lost worlds. They learned to pilot drones and patch hulls. It was not paradise. It was noisy and improvised, stitched together with overwork and thin budgets. But for the children of Helion, it was the first stability they had known in years. That made it a threat. Praetor Velkun watched Harborfall's progress with a predator's cold interest. In private, behind the Dominion's armored doors, he played feeds of Cathari teenagers in joint drills and saw not victims, but a seed stock of disciplined fighters under human influence. "If we cannot remove their capacity to reproduce, we must at least limit their capacity to act," he told the Jatiri Security Conclave. "We cannot strike at humans openly. Not yet. Public sentiment is weak, but not that weak. So we will make Harborfall look exactly like what they accuse us of creating, a child army." Jatiri intelligence operatives reached out to Cathari resentments. Smugglers slipped unregistered weapons into cargo manifests bound for Harborfall. Whisper networks carried messages to some of the more embittered youths. They found fertile ground in a faction that had always chafed at Merrick and Sanaa's constraints. Boys and girls who had lost more family than they cared to count, who felt that practicing with stolen assault rifles behind hydroponic stacks was more meaningful than sitting through lectures on interstellar law. Secret meetings formed, plans whispered in shadows. All it would take, the whispers said, was one dramatic blow against human control, live on the feeds, to prove that the Cathari would not be tamed. Dhaari heard rumors. He tracked shifting groupings, noted who suddenly had more credits to spend at the makeshift bazaar. His authority was never absolute. Children listened to him when it suited them, and turned away when it did not. He chose his interventions carefully, wanting to avoid becoming a caricature of control. He did not intervene soon enough. The breaking of Corinth Exchange began as a gesture of good faith. Under pressure at the Spiral Assembly, where accusations of militarizing miners flew like darts, Raunan had agreed to allow a Concord Shield detachment to undergo inspection at Corinth Exchange. Neutral observers would tour the contingent ships, review training programs, and report back that the Guardian Foundry program was not, in fact, fielding an army of child soldiers. Helion's diplomats had argued that this transparency would cool fears. Raunan had agreed, hoping to buy Harborfall time. The inspection group never reached Corinth. Velkun's plan snapped shut in mid-transit. Jatiri ships with masked transponders flashed out of folded space along the convoy's route. They were painted in scavenged colors, Their signatures scrambled to suggest fringe raiders. The first volley slammed into the lead inspection cruiser as its shields cycled from standby to alert. Several compartments vented hard into space. A human trainee stared at sudden emptiness where a corridor had been, then was yanked back by a safety tether just in time. Within minutes, the exchange devolved into chaos. Conquered shield escorts fought back hard, their gunners skilled and furious. But Velkun's captains had been given precise orders: cause maximal confusion, inflict enough casualties to shock the assembly, then break off and vanish. In the aftermath, forged sensor logs surfaced across assembly networks. They showed what Velkun wanted them to show: Helion ships firing first, then overreacting violently when neutral raiders approached. Frames were spliced to imply human hotheads at the trigger. Little context was offered. Although doubt flickered in some circles, fear and outrage traveled faster. Many delegates already wary of Harborfall's experiment saw vindication. At Port Lumen, emergency beacons glowed red. The spiral's oldest instinct, self-protection, kicked in. Under Orsolan prodding, the Assembly authorized a limited enforcement action against Harborfall, framed as a necessary measure to restore trust and prevent further incidents. When the order reached him, Raunan stood very still. He knew the trap. He could see Velkun's fingerprints all over it. But the authorization bore the Assembly's legal stamp. If he resisted, Helion's position would be pushed from dissenting toward rogue irrevocably. He thought of the children on Harborfall, of Elder Sailry's hands shaking as she handed him a data crystal containing the names of the dead from the caravan. He thought of Dhaari's voice asking what would happen if they refused to choose. He keyed his fleet-wide channel. Concord Shield. This is Armitage. Enforcement vessels are inbound to Harborfall under Assembly orders. They may claim they are coming to assume control of the Guardian Foundry program. They may claim they are coming as peacekeepers. Our orders are simple. We hold the line. We do not abandon our charges. We minimize casualties, but we do not let anyone drag children out of their own homes to face scalpels. There was no dissent this time. On Harborfall, the sky darkened with approaching drives. Warning sirens wailed through Zenith Crown and the surface settlements. Sanaa led triage teams into underground hardened shelters, her voice steady over suit comms as she shepherded crowds of shaking children down reinforced ramps. Merrick squads deployed around key nodes, power plants, comm arrays, the control center that linked Bastion field projectors. Marines and Kethari trainees took positions together, their faces tight. "This is not about glory," Merrick told them. "Our job is to buy time. You see an enemy turn away, you let them. Wounded are not targets. We are here to keep breathing things breathing." Zuri, with her squad of mixed human Marines and Kethari youths, took charge of close-quarters evacuation routes. In practice, this meant hauling stubborn adolescents out of open plazas and shoving them towards safety. "I am not hiding," one teen protested, clutching a homemade spear. "You are not cannon meat either," Zuri snapped. "Give me that thing and get below, or I swear I will throw you over my shoulder and carry you." Ritu hunkered in Zenith Crown's primary control hub, fingers flying across holokeys. Power levels, shield efficiencies, magnetic stress, all scrolled past her in dizzying arrays. "Node C is lagging," she hissed. "Get me a tech team there now. And someone tell the kids in Dome 12 they can't keep running their cooking heaters at full, or they'll unbalance the grid." "You want me to tell them to eat cold soup during a siege?" came a dry voice on the internal channel. "You tell them." "I will!" Ritu shot back, even as she sent a power-limiting override. In the midst of this chaos, a quiet ping reached Dhaari's personal console. The encryption tag was unfamiliar. Curiosity fought with suspicion. He glanced at Elder Sailry, who sat nearby in the council chamber, listening to status reports. He opened it and found a text-only message. The header bore Jatiri signatures. The routing tags were scrubbed, but the origin was clear. The Jatiri Security Conclave. "Dhaari, of the Provisional Council," it began. "You have shown courage and leadership. It is wasted under human tutelage." He read on. A coldness creeping into his spine. Velkun's offer was simple, wrapped in the language of solidarity. They would supply advanced weapons, encrypted communication gear, and off-world support to a select group of Cathari willing to seize Harborfall's armories and expel Helion forces. In return, those Cathari would denounce the Commonwealth's indoctrination and declare Harborfall a Cathari-controlled revolutionary zone. "You will never be safe while your fate is in human hands," the message concluded. "Take your future with your own." Dhaari's claws slid out of their sheaths, scraping lightly on the console. Part of him, the part that remembered being numb in that cargo bay while strangers voted out his bloodline, responded viscerally to the promise of striking back, of not being beholden to anyone. He imagined leading a cadre into the armory, seizing crates under Marek's stunned gaze. He imagined broadcasting a declaration in his own language. "We need no guardians." He also imagined what would happen next. Harborfall isolated, cut off from human support. Jatiri, friends arriving later, insisting on coordination. Always another condition, another compromise, until the children were tools in yet another empire's hand. He forwarded the message to Sailrai. "What are they asking?" She asked softly, reading the lines. "To become their little knife," he said, voice brittle. And they are right about one thing," he said. "We are not safe while others decide for us. But we will be less safe if we trade one set of masters for another." His gut roiled. He thought of the angry, weapon-hungry faction that might leap at this offer and drag everyone with them. "We could pretend to accept," he said slowly. "String them along, gain weapons, then turn them back on them, and become the very thing they believe you are," Sailrai said. "Clever, ruthless. A pawn who thinks it is a player," Dhaari glared. "So what should I do? Ignore it? They will find someone else to recruit. Someone more desperate." "Then you must make it harder for them," she said. "Commit in the open, not just inside your head. Say aloud what you will not do." He knew what she meant. The weight of it sat on his tongue. "Open a channel," he told the Council's Comtech. "Not just internal, public, to assembly feeds." "Now?" the tech squeaked. In the middle of "now." A moment later, the comm indicator blinked, steady. He could feel the eyes of millions on the other side of that tiny light. "I am Dhaari of Helion," he said, voice steady over a background of distant sirens. "Praetor Velkun of the Jatiri Dominion has made me an offer. He wants me to help him turn Harborfall into his weapon. He says humans only help their own, and that if we join with him, we can be free." He swallowed hard. "I say no," he continued. "I say we have been cut and moved and burned enough. We will not be someone else's example. We will not trade one collar for another. We asked humans for help, and they gave it. They gave us tools and said, 'Use them to decide for yourselves.' Whatever they ask us to do later, we can still say no. With him, there would be no no. Only orders, dressed in pretty lies." He looked into the pickup, imagining Velkun hearing this. "You want to help us, Praetor?" he said. "Then call off your fleets. Stop trying to erase us. Anything else is just another game." His words went out across the Assembly's networks, hijacking attention in dozens of chambers and homes. On Jatiri warships, officers stared at their screens, astounded that a refugee youth had just spoken to their praetor so directly. In Maliri temples, choristers hummed approval into their stones. On Earth, in Helion's cities, people stopped at public displays and watched, breath held. On Harborfall's command deck, Raunin listened with a swelling pride he did not allow into his voice as he issued his next set of orders. "Enforcement fleet is within weapons range," Hideo reported. "They're broadcasting a final warning. They say we are obstructing a lawful mandate. They say I know what they say," Raunin cut in. "Return message. Harborfall is under Helion protection at the request of a recognized local authority. Any attempt to enforce medical procedures on minors without consent will be treated as aggression. We will defend, but we will not pursue." He knew the words might not deter a single shot, but they would shape how the battle was remembered. Outside, the sky lit with the flare of drives and the flicker of forming energy webs. The first beams lanced out from an Ursulan cruiser, bright spears aimed at Harborfall's upper atmosphere. Whether the captain had misread a sensor glitch or simply panicked, the effect was the same. Bastion field projectors read the incoming surge and flashed white. On Zenith Crown, Ritu swore as 7 of her indicators pegged into the red. "Redistribute from node D to C," she shouted into her mic. "And tell whoever is tapping into auxiliary for their personal fabricators to cut it right now, or I will fry them." Her apprentice team of Cathari and human teens scrambled over maintenance gantries, yanking open panels, redistributing power feeds. The fields shimmered, absorbing the first barrage. A second came, hotter. The enforcement fleet was not acting as a single mind. Some captains held back, appalled at firing on a planet's defensive grid ringed with children's habitats. Others, whipped into righteous fervor by the Corinth incident, thought they were finally dealing with a dangerous escalation. Their confusion made the first minutes messy and erratic. Within that confusion, Raider-pattern vessels Velkun's covert assets darted, firing from odd angles, hoping to provoke an overreaction that cameras could beam across the assembly. Merrick's squads hugged the inside of Harborfall's hardened emplacements, listening to the thunder of near misses. Distant impacts sent dust drifting from ceiling seams. He checked his people, human and Cathari alike, for wide eyes and trembling hands. "Breathe," he told them. "Check your safeties. Remember your lanes. No one fires on a retreating signature without clear, hostile intent. We are not here for vengeance. We are here to hold long enough for the politicians to catch up." Zuri's team moved through a cramped tunnel, ushering late-arriving groups into the shelters. One Cathari girl clutched a bundle of seedlings close to her chest. "I can't leave them," she said when Zuri tried to pull her along. "They won't survive in the dark." "You put them down, I'll carry them," Zuri said, hoisting the planter with one hand. "You carry you." The girl blinked. "Why?" "Because I like breathing," Zuri snapped, hauling them forward. "And I've seen what happens to people who keep living things when they run instead of running. They trip and die, and the plants die too. Now move." On the Resolute Horizons bridge, status icons pulsed like frantic hearts. Hideo called out target data through gritted teeth. "They're focusing on Node F," he said. "If it goes down, they can punch through the upper atmosphere at that point. We'll have holes in our shield grid." "Send the Monsoon and the Diligent to interpose," Raunon ordered. "Non-lethal if possible. Take their guns, not their lives." The 2 Helion frigates swung into new vectors, their own fields flaring as they intercepted shots meant for Harborfall's core. Their retaliatory fire was precise, aimed at weapon emplacements, sensor clusters, anything that could degrade the enforcement fleet's ability to continue. Inside the spiral assembly chamber, the battle unfolded in real time on hovering displays. Delegates who had never seen a fight of this scale before stared, transfixed. Those who had fought wars long ago felt old scars itch. Leila stood at the center, flanked by aides, her gaze flicking between tactical feeds and the faces of those around her. "They are firing into protective grids around civilian shelters," she said. "You do see that, yes? They think they are stopping an illegal militarization," an Ursulan delegate countered. But their hooded eyes were less certain now. "They are breaking their own pretenses," Trishelle murmured, watching Cathari and human silhouettes move through Harborfall's tunnels, children clutching hands. "Pacification, that looks like slaughter." Leila pressed the advantage. "Chair," she said, voice amplified. "This enforcement action has exceeded its stated scope. It is no longer about assuming control of a training program. It is an assault on a settlement of minors." She signaled to her aide, who patched in a direct link. The chamber hushed as a new window opened in the air. Harborfall's command center. The view was jittery at first, then stabilized, showing a low-ceilinged room crowded with consoles and people. Human officers bent over scopes. Cathari teenagers sat at comm stations, their ears flicking as they relayed information. Dust-coated helmets sat askew on racks at the back. Alarm lights pulsed in the background. In the foreground were 3 figures. Raunon, lines of focus carved deep into his face. Sanaa, headset askew, hands stained with someone's blood. And, between them, Dhaari, wearing an emergency jacket that was slightly too big. The feed's audio lagged by a fraction of a second. It carried the distant echo of impacts, the blare of warning tones, the bark of orders. Leila stepped back, deliberately, seating the frame. The chair being cleared its throat. Harborfall, this is the Spiral Assembly in emergency session. We see you. Be advised, we are reviewing Mandate 60B in light of current events. Meanwhile, your ships are trying to cut open our shields. Rounen's voice came through hard and clear. With respect, Chair, reviews do not stop beams. He turned slightly, signaling to someone off-screen. Amaru Quispe stepped into view, throat mic pressed against his skin. He looked young because he was with unruly hair and eyes that had seen too much in the last weeks. He had come to Harborfall as a youth delegate, a bridge. Now he stood in a storm. With your permission, Leila said quickly, I yield the floor to representatives of those under fire. The chair hesitated, then gave a tiny nod the translation system rendered as assent. Amaru swallowed. He could feel millions watching. But he thought of the days he had spent in Harborfall's classrooms, listening to Dhaari kids joke about old films, stealing extra sweets when Merrick wasn't looking. He thought of Dhaari showing him the shallow hollow in the ground where he buried scraps of metal that reminded him of home. My name is Amaru Quispe, he said. I'm a youth delegate from Earth. I came here to see Harborfall with my own eyes. I've been here for 3 months. I've eaten in Dhaari kitchens, slept in their dorms, listened to them snore. They are just kids. They want to know if their seedlings will grow, and whether Ritu will let them skip maintenance duty if they ace their exams. A faint ripple of laughter, half nerves, moved through the assembly. You voted, Amaru continued, his voice firming. You said, for their own good, we will make sure none of them has children. You did that from these seats. You watched them on screens and made that choice. Humans said no. Not because we are better than you. We are not. Our history is full of horrors. We said no because we remember what it feels like when someone else decides your grandchildren will not exist. He gestured at Dhaari, inviting him forward. Dhaari moved into the frame. Dust streaked his fur. He looked tired beyond his years. His eyes, though, burned. I am Dhaari, he said. From Rilanas. From nowhere. Now. He shifted, ears angling forward. When your ships came to our convoy with doctors and soldiers, he said, you did not ask us what we wanted. You did not tell us everything. You wrote words on paper here, far away, and decided our future ended with us. Humans came and asked if we wanted help. They told us about the clause in your accord. They said we could choose to ask them to protect us. We chose. We made a council. We signed our names. Even though our paws shook, we did not know if it would work. But it did something. It gave us this. He swept an arm to indicate the room around him. The screens, the young Dhaari at comms, the humans nearby. You say we are too young to decide whether to have children, he went on. Maybe you are right. I do not know if I want that yet. I know this. I am old enough to understand when someone wants to cut away pieces of me without asking. I am old enough to know that my little cousins should hear maybe and later, not never. You were willing to let us choose nothing. Humans were willing to let us choose something, even if it made everything harder. He looked straight into the pickup. If you care about peace, he said, stop trying to make it by making sure my people stop existing. Let us live. Let us make mistakes. Let us argue. If we become a danger later, then you can talk to us, not just about us. His words cracked at the end, but he did not look away. The chamber was very, very quiet when he finished. Envoy Trishelle, who had spoken so often for careful, principled nonviolence, felt their harmonies twist around a new note. They thought of their own larvae, their soft ovoid bodies, almost wiped out in another age because an occupying force feared what they might become. The Maliri chorus moves, Trishelle said suddenly, their voice thrumming. We move to suspend Mandate 60B immediately, to order all forces to disengage from Harborfall, to open a full inquiry into the events at Corinth Exchange and the Jatiri Dominion's conduct. A Kirax delegate, mandibles clicking in remembered anger, seconded without hesitation. Their species had once teetered on the edge of being culled into sterility themselves. Debate, flared fast, hot. Some delegates sputtered indignation. Others seized the opportunity to distance themselves from a policy that now looked, on public screens, like a prelude to slaughter. Leila did not speak. She stood, hands clasped lightly, and let the images of Harborfall's mixed defense speak for her. On the enforcement flagship, orders and counter-orders crackled across channels as news of the Assembly's emergency motion reached captains mid-maneuver. Some refused to believe it. Others, seeing their own hulls scarred and their crews rattled, quietly rejoiced. When the override passed by the narrowest of margins, the chair being's command went out on all official bands. All forces engaged at Harborfall and its orbital region. Cease fire. Disengage immediately. This is a binding order of the Spiral Assembly pending investigation. Any further aggressive act will be treated as rogue action. In Zenith Crown's control hub, Ritu sagged back in her harness as energy readings dropped. "They're pulling away," Hideo reported from the Resolute Horizons bridge, relief tempered by suspicion. Weapons going to standby, vectors redirecting. Raunon held his own fire. "Confirm across 3 independent sources," he said. "Then send acknowledgement. We will not chase them. Once we are sure they are not turning their guns back on Harborfall, we will stand down to defensive posture only." He knew the battle would live on in recordings. How they ended it mattered as much as how they fought it. Dhaari watched enforcement ships recede on the command center's main display, feeling a tension he had not realized he carried begin to ease. His limbs felt suddenly heavy. "We're alive," he whispered. Elder Sailrai, somewhere in the shelter network, laughed once, one sharp, incredulous sound. Then she wept for those who had not seen this day. Later, after casualty counts were tallied and ships stabilized, a joint investigative commission was formed. Velkun's machinations were dragged into the light. The false flag attack at Corinth, the smuggled weapons, the covert offers to Harborfall's youths. The Dominion's public standing took a blow. Velkun found himself fending off not just external condemnation, but internal dissent. Some of his own officers, watching replays of Dhaari's speech, began to question whether their praetor had truly acted in their people's best interest. For Harborfall, the aftermath was bruised, but breathing. The Bastion field projectors bore scorch marks visible from orbit. Several habdomes had cracked, their patches obvious. Funerals were held in crowded plazas under the stormy sky. Names were spoken in Cathari and human tongues. Yet, life continued. Greenhouses, hastily depowered during the siege, flickered back to full brightness. Children trudged back to classrooms, complaining about homework even as they showed off new scars. Ritu rewrote power management protocols, this time with Cathari teenagers as co-authors. Merrick revised training drills, incorporating case studies from the battle. Sanaa convened joint circles where survivors could speak about fear and anger without being told to be heroic. One clear morning, after the storms had parted for once, a new starship lifted from Harborfall's surface. Its hull bore no national insignia. Instead, its flank carried a symbol rough but proud, a stylized sapling growing out of a cracked hull, drawn by one of the younger Cathari. Inside, the crew strapped in, hearts racing. They were Cathari and human, barely adults, volunteers. Their mission was not conquest, it was patrol. They would range the edges of Veneris Reach, watching for distress signals, opportunistic raiders, anyone who thought refugees were easy prey. Admiral Raunon Armitage watched the ship climb from a viewing platform on Zenith Crown, his hands folded behind his back. Beside him, Dhaari stood straight, fur-brushed, wearing a simple jacket with the Council's insignia. His ears tilted back slightly as he tracked the departing vessel. "You could have named it anything," Raunon said quietly. "Why this?" Dhaari shrugged, eyes still on the sky. Homeward sounded too final. Vengeance sounded wrong. We chose Watchlight instead. It seemed right. We were in the dark once. Someone lit a light so we didn't disappear. Maybe we can do that for others. Raunon glanced at him. "You know they will call you armed children." Dhaari's mouth quirked. "They already did. The difference now is that some of them will also call us neighbors or allies." He breathed out slowly. When your ship appeared on our screens back then, he said, I thought you were another predator. You had guns, uniforms, the voice of someone used to being obeyed, and you asked us to sign something. It felt like the start of a trap. It could have been, Raunan said, if we had been who they feared we were. But you gave us time, Dhaari said, and tools. And you said the hardest words an adult ever says to a child. You choose. He looked at Raunan directly. You could have made the choice easy for yourselves, he said. You could have agreed with them, cut us quietly, and told yourselves it was mercy. Instead, you chose a world where we might grow up and become your enemies. That is very stupid. Raunan laughed, surprised and genuine. Probably, he said, but I like to think it is the kind of stupidity that keeps civilizations honest. They watched the watchlight disappear into the blue. Its engines left a faint, auroral trail, gone in seconds. All across the spiral, watchers tracked its progress. In the Assembly's records, new entries appeared. Revised clauses on forced medical interventions, new frameworks on the rights of minor populations, cautious praise for the Guardian Foundry program's outcomes. Somewhere, a future scholar would write that this was the moment the galaxy realized that arming children with trust and agency was more dangerous and more hopeful than any rifle. On Harborfall's surface, in a little garden sheltered from the wind, a Cathari child knelt in the soil. With careful hands, they pressed a seedling into place. Their ears twitched as a storm growled in the distance. They smiled anyway. Above them, ships moved. Decisions would be made in distant chambers. Debates would continue. Nothing was settled forever. But for now, the children of Thaleen had their own hands on the controls of their shared tomorrow. And across space, humanity watched, ready to argue, to work, to fight, if needed, not to own that tomorrow, but to make sure no one took it away again.